All right, so this should be a somewhat shorter video on absolutism, and we've kind of already talked about this topic or the idea of absolutism. So absolutism is ultimately when a leader is going to hold all power within its boundaries. And so typically these leaders are going to emphasize the use of divine right and this argument that God bestowed them with their power or allowed them to get into that position. And so you're not really supposed to challenge an absolute leader. And so you really want to familiarize yourself with that divine right of kings. So there's various causes. What led to absolutism? Well, when we think about European history, we had that age of feudalism that had developed in response to invasions from the Vikings and from the Magyars. And so feudalism developed, kind of restored order. But with that came the rise of cities, and alongside that, different types of profit. But then there were also, in the midst of these economic changes in Western European history, was the rise of religious conflict, and that came from the Protestant Reformation and others. And so ultimately, what happens is all of this unrest leads to this position where kings are able to, or feel it's necessary to, increase their power, to kind of quell those conflicts and to end any type of rebellion or further chaos in Europe. And in some cases, it's welcomed because it does provide kind of this uniform expectation of one leader. But what we're going to start seeing as we move forward in the unit with the Age of Enlightenment is that absolutism starts being questioned. So this was actually a cool, neat graphic that shows the different types of characteristics. So not only is the absolute leader going to challenge the nobility, because the nobility is typically going to be the ones that could try and challenge or take away their position, but they make the laws. They can put forward the punishments. They typically ignore other ideas. They're basically going to put forward their initiatives rather than what other initiatives may be. They are going to somehow control religion and really focus on kind of increasing their military, whether it's to expand its borders or just increase the size of the military. So we're going to talk about Spain, France, and Russia as far as absolutism is concerned. Spain is going to undergo this process of rapid expansion, and that comes from their taking over of various parts of the Americas. It kind of leads into their ability to reconquer Spain under that Reconquista, where they're taking the territory back from the Jewish population, from the Muslim population in the region. And Henry IV, or Henry of Navarre, is going to kind of establish this basis, and this is going to lead into future conflict as well, just because of who he is and his relationship to France. But Philip II is going to gain power, and he is going to kind of exert this role or exert his power as an absolute monarch. He is strictly Catholic, really adheres to that doctrine, and is willing to challenge those that are Protestant or those that could put forth an issue for Catholics. And so he has kind of crowned this idea of the most Catholic king in association with the Pope. And in conflict, he is going to send the Spanish Armada to England. Now, this has some other, there's other factors that play into this. But Queen Elizabeth, if you remember Henry's daughter, Henry VIII's daughter, is going to be ruling at the time. She was Protestant or Anglican. And so she had encouraged the Anglican Church or brought it back together with the Act of Supremacy. And Philip is not happy with that. Again, he is strictly Catholic. So he is going to send the Spanish Armada or the fleet to England. This is actually going to really lead to the demise of Spanish power because he is not successful in this venture. And it's not just because, Elizabeth gives this rallying cry, but there's weather, environmental issues that kind of hold him back. So he loses. And Spain starts kind of losing its position. The Netherlands are going to declare their independence. They had initially been a part of Spain. With the Reconquista, as they led to or forced Jews and Muslims out of Spain, that also gets people that had been paying taxes out. So now you've got to increase your taxation to kind of make up for that loss. And so you're going to see that people become very frustrated. Spain is going to be forced to declare bankruptcy 3 times. And so really Spain just kind of falls after that and really just holds a minor position. So in France, you have Louis XIII, and there's not too much you need to know about Louis XIII. More so, he is going to come to power at a very young age 9, which is not the youngest. But he comes to power at the age of 9, and the Cardinal Richelieu, is going to help Louis rule. Richelieu basically is making all of the decisions. In a lot of movies that he's been in, a lot of them are a little dated. He is seen as very ambitious, cast in kind of this negative light, and he was ambitious, but he was also trying to increase the power of the monarch, but inevitably that increased his power. So he is going to challenge the Huguenots, which, if you remember, are the French Protestants. So he is going to kind of get rid of this idea that there should be toleration for them in France. He is going to weaken the nobility. He forces them to tear down their castles because he recognizes the nobility pose challenges or threats to the power of the monarch. But one of the things that he believes is kind of his best action, which is debatable, is that he gets France involved in the 30 Years' War. He wants to challenge the Habsburg family, and I'll get into this a little bit later, because they were presenting a threat to various families in Europe, Western Europe at the time. So he kind of wants to push for that. So there is a picture of Richelieu. I don't have one of Louis, more so again because Richelieu is kind of the one that is making the major decisions. So Louis the 14th is the successor here, and he is this ideal person as far as an absolute monarch is concerned. So he becomes king at the age of 4. Obviously, a 4-year-old is not going to be capable of ruling. So similar to Louis the 13th, he is going to be aided by Cardinal, but his cardinal is going to be Cardinal Mazarin. Mazarin is not like Richelieu. You know, they both are ambitious, but Mazarin is highly disliked, so much so that these rebellions break out. And while it does end up increasing Louis's power, it really kind of shows that there are some challenges with how people are receiving Mazarin. So he is going to increase the taxes on nobility specifically. And so that is going to lead to this rebellion. And again, they're squashed, but at that point, it kind of leads into these challenges. So Mazarin is going to die, not from the rebellions, but he's going to die a little bit later. And Louis is able at that point, at the age of 22, to take complete control. And again, kind of identifies as this true example of an absolute monarch. He is going to strip the nobles of their power, really is condescending towards them. They are no longer allowed to kind of give him counsel. They are invited to come to the capital at Versailles, but typically they're supposed to kind of dote on him. So they're lucky if he's even willing to listen to them. And so, again, kind of shows that they need to get in his good graces. And he's aware that, you know, or they should be aware that their power is kind of dependent on him. He creates the role of intendants, which are people that are going to be tax collectors that really kind of work alongside Louis. He is going to create or use the Minister of Finance, and that's Jean-Baptiste Colbert, who is going to focus on this idea that France needs to become self-sufficient, focuses on this idea of mercantilism and that you should have more exports than you have imports, so the country is bringing in more money than it's spending as far as goods are concerned. And so he increases or encourages Louis to increase these taxes on imports, which you can see even the U.S. kind of does at times as well in our history. So it's not something that's a novel idea, but one that actually will lead into France gaining more money. Louis is going to revoke the Edict of Nantes, which was this push for toleration, like true toleration of the Huguenots or the French Protestants, and kind of makes himself this seemingly in control of religion. He is nicknamed the Sun King and is famous for a French phrase saying that I am the state. So again, everything kind of revolves around him. He is going to have these like grand feasts and spend tons of money on his wardrobe and on building this new palace of Versailles. Art is going to be used to glorify the king rather than the church, or rather than individual ideas. And so, like, this is one of the most iconic images because I always just love that pose that he's got there. But you can see that wealth that's in that portrait of him. And so everything is centered around Louis, and he is going to get involved in the wars of Spanish succession and really pursue um, a lot of spending, personally and militarily. So the problem is that once Louis dies, you're going to see that this leads into this spiral or concern of France is now in debt, and they have a series of poor harvests. So here's the Palace of Versailles. This is the Hall of Mirrors. Again, you can see that he has this completely built. It's gorgeous, and this is where the nobility will kind of wait on him, but very costly. So Russian absolutism starts with Ivan the Terrible. He is going to kind of come to a power. He has these good years. Terrible in Russian was not actually meant to be terrible as what we would see it. It could be like awestruck or awe-inspiring or things like that. But he crowns himself Tsar, meaning Caesar, to kind of connect back to that Byzantine or Roman heritage. And witnessed a lot of devastation when he was younger. He had watched that individuals that were supposed to become leaders of the Russian monarch were killed by Russian nobility or boyars. And so he kind of becomes a little paranoid. And then when his wife dies, he claims that the boyars, the nobility, had done that, that they had poisoned her and led to her death. And so he becomes much more erratic. He creates the secret police, the Oprichnina here, that basically would ride around, and they would have like sometimes they would even have like people's heads if they had to execute them. They were basically like this group of spies that were meant to kind of punish the boyars. And so he is going to kind of go into this fit of rage, but he was very, very devout Christian. So interesting little perspective. But he is going to kill his son in a fit of rage, which leads his other son, which was, very weak-minded individual to rule. And then his death is going to lead into this time of troubles because now we have no heir. And so what will eventually happen is you'll see kind of the start of the Romanov dynasty. And so Peter the Great is going to be one of the more significant absolute leaders as well, kind of like Louis was, where he initially kind of shares his throne with his half brother. He is able or forced to kind of wrangle his position as well from his half sister. He sends her to a convent and pursues this policy of westernization. So Peter is a little over 6 feet. I think it's like 6'4", and he decides to go on this like undercover mission to learn about Western ideas because when the Mongols had controlled Russia, Russia had not undergone that kind of those ideas of education and learning and different types of industrial changes. And so Peter seeks this change and goes to these schools and learns about how Western countries were developing, and he comes back and uses that information. Everybody knew who he was because, again, it's not like he can hide. But he is going to exhibit absolutism through abolishing the patriarch, that position, and creating the Holy Synod, which were religious officials that were directed at coming to him, reporting to him. He reduces the boyars' authority. He tells them that they have to shave their beards, and if they don't, they have to pay an additional tax, although there are stories that he would actually go around and cut their beards. He increases the military size drastically, which leads to the increase of taxation. Does increase or create one of the first newspapers, builds new schools, but building St. Petersburg is probably one of his biggest contributions because Peter is going to build this new swampy capital that leads to a lot of people dying, but also is this capital near to the west. And so he really wants to show this movement of Russia being backwards to being forwards and adopting these Western ideas. And so he was able to get that Baltic port with a conflict with Sweden, but it did lead to about 100,000 peasants dying because of the conditions of trying to build this new capital on a